My lawyer husband kicked me out with our 3 young children. I secretly inherited $3 billion and came back to take everything back. My name is Emily Walker, 37 years old, living in the suburbs of Plano, Texas. I used to have a life most people would call a dream. I was a full-time housewife, no job, no paycheck. But every day of mine was filled with countless unseen tasks: driving the kids to school, cooking full-course dinners, folding laundry that smelled like lavender softener, and helping with homework while my husband was still buried in court cases. My husband, Jonathan, was a renowned defense attorney, polished, successful, and well-spoken. He wore tailored suits, drove to his law office in downtown Dallas, and always carried the air of a perfect husband. We had 3 children: Liam, Noah, and Sophie, my 3 little angels, my whole world. Our home had 4 bedrooms, a spacious backyard, and a swing I built with my own hands. From the outside, everything looked picture perfect, but people didn't see what happened behind those doors. I used to believe staying home was my choice, that I was doing the right thing for the family. But gradually, I realized I was just a shadow in my own life. Jonathan no longer asked what I thought or how I felt. Dinner was filled with his voice, stories of courtrooms, clients, victories, while I quietly served food to the kids. I don't remember the last time he truly looked at me. Whenever I brought up finances or simply wanted to share something, he'd give a half smile. "Don't worry about it. That's not your concern." Eventually, I learned to stay quiet. I became invisible in the house I scrubbed from top to bottom. Every meal homemade, every birthday cake baked by me. But not once did anyone ask, "Are you tired?" And when you're taken for granted long enough, you begin to question your own worth. That afternoon felt like any other. I had just finished mopping the kitchen. The beef stew was simmering on the stove. The kids were giggling in the living room, watching their usual cartoons. I had set the table, white plate for Jonathan, pastel blue for the kids, just like every day. I wasn't trying to check his phone, I swear. But while wiping tomato sauce off Sophie's shirt, his phone buzzed. A messenger notification lit up the screen. No passcode needed to read. "Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you." With a heart emoji. I froze. My hand went cold. It felt like someone had poured ice water down my spine. I looked around. Jonathan wasn't home. The kids were still laughing. Everything seemed normal, but my heart was pounding. I'm not the jealous type, but that woman's instinct, that sixth sense I had ignored for so long, was now screaming. I unlocked the phone with his birth date. Too easy, too bitter, and there it was, a whole world I never knew existed. Her name was Madison Clark, his new assistant. Blonde curls, mirror selfies, with glitter filters, constantly calling him Daddy in her texts. The first message I saw was sent at 2 a.m. the night before. "I can still smell you on me. I wish I'd woken up next to you." I kept reading and reading. The further I scrolled, the more my heart shattered. Photos of them at a hotel, him holding her from behind, still wearing the shirt I had ironed last week. They laughed, toasted wine, and spoke of leaving the past behind. I collapsed onto the kitchen floor. The stew had burned. Sophie called for me. I forced a smile, told her I was fine, and ran to the bathroom to dry heave. When Jonathan came home, I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply placed the phone on the table and pointed to the screen. "Is there anything you want to say?" He glanced at it, sighed, sat down, and loosened his tie. "I'm tired, Emily. We both know this can't be saved. No apology, no shame. Just a cold sentence, ending a 12-year marriage." Days later, he served me divorce papers. I was the defendant, an unemployed wife with no assets, now forced to prove I was fit to be a mother. He hired a top law firm in Dallas. And the worst part? His parents sided with him. The same mother-in-law who once cried hugging me at our wedding now sat in court and said, "She has no career, no direction. How can she raise 3 children?" I lost the house, the one where I hung every photo, painted every wall in my children's rooms. I lost the SUV. I used to drive the kids to school. I rented a cheap apartment near the bus stop. 1 bedroom, leaky walls, a toilet that gurgled all night. But at least there, I could hold my children at night, without being called useless every time I opened my mouth. On the day of the divorce hearing, Jonathan wore shiny shoes and walked past me like a stranger. Right before signing the papers, he leaned in and whispered, "No one wants a boring, dependent woman like you." I clenched my fists, said nothing. But one thing I knew for sure, I would not remain on the sidelines forever. In the early days after the divorce, I was no longer myself. I, Emily Walker, the woman who once folded her husband's shirts every morning, baked cupcakes for her kids' birthdays, and wrote thank you cards to their teachers, was now sitting on a worn-out mattress in a damp rental room, trying to figure out how to stretch the last $63 between the electric bill, milk, and the cheapest birthday cake from Walmart. I woke up at 5 a.m., quietly brewed coffee with a second-hand machine I bought for $10 on Facebook Marketplace, then took 3 bus stops to work the morning shift at a sandwich shop. My hands were cracked from dough. My hair was always tied up with an old rubber band. My canvas shoes were starting to rip at the heels. At night, I helped the kids with homework under the flickering yellow light. They stayed cheerful, still asking, "Mom, can we go somewhere fun tomorrow?" And I just smiled, hiding the stack of unpaid bills beneath a second-grade math notebook. Some nights, I sat alone in the bathroom, covering my mouth so they wouldn't hear me cry. Not because I was weak, but because I was afraid they'd hear and worry. I applied for jobs everywhere: grocery stores, fast food chains, libraries. But 12 years without employment was enough to push every resume of mine to the rejection pile. Once, a young manager looked at my application and asked, "So you were a full-time mom? Can you stand on your feet for 8 hours straight?" I smiled and replied, "I once stood 18 hours a day just to make sure 3 kids were fed, slept well, and grew up strong." But who cared about that? I was rejected over 20 times. There were moments I wanted to give up, but then I looked at my kids, their eyes still full of trust when they called me Mom, and I knew, if I fell, no one else would rise for me. I started learning again. At first, it was free online courses late at night. I learned to type. I studied Excel. I practiced office skills. After a few months, I landed a job as a temporary administrative assistant at a small real estate office. The pay was low, but to me, it was the first door back into life. I was no longer the woman who smiled just to look good in family photos. I was a single mother, a fighter. Every dollar I earned came from sweat, from tears, and from the humiliation I swallowed for 2 long years. I didn't have a beautiful house, I didn't have a fancy husband, but I had 3 kind-hearted children, 2 hands that refused to surrender, and a heart that was slowly learning to love itself again. I used to be a broke single mother, counting every penny just to buy diapers, but 15 years later, people know me as Emily Walker, CEO of EW Capital Group, a financial firm managing investment funds for small and mid-sized businesses across the eastern U.S. My life didn't change because of luck. It changed because I refused to let bitterness be my permanent address. It all began with an unpaid internship at a small real estate brokerage in Fort Worth. I worked like a mad woman, answering phones, organizing files, memorizing every term related to credit, appraisal, and loan contracts. At night, after the kids fell asleep, I learned corporate accounting on YouTube and devoured books on financial lending. 2 years later, I became a full-time employee. 4 years later, I was branch manager. I discovered I had a mind for analysis. I understood how small businesses collapsed due to cash flow issues, how banks weren't built for those without collateral assets, and I decided that needed to change. I quit, borrowed $80,000 from a believer, and opened my own company with just 3 people: myself, a retired accountant, and a college intern. EW Capital Group was born in a former nail salon, peeling walls, a noisy old AC, and nothing glamorous, but I knew my client's pain because I had lived it. I had once slept in moldy apartments. I had once been denied because I had no credit worthiness. We began by funding working capital for small shops, bakeries, family pharmacies, moms selling handmade crafts from their living rooms. I didn't make them rich, but I gave them a chance to begin again. The one thing I once wished for, more than anything. 15 years later, from a 3-person firm, we've become a multi-state financial group, managing over $450 million in active capital. I moved to Naples, Florida, into a white seafront villa with a lavender-filled backyard and a small library where I spend Sunday mornings reading with my daughter. Sophie is now 17, top of her class statewide. Liam, my eldest, is in his sophomore year at Johns Hopkins, studying medicine. The same boy who once cried in my arms after classmates mocked him as the sandwich lady's son is now interning at the biggest ER in Maryland. I couldn't save a marriage, but I saved my life. Then one day, the past knocked on my door. My assistant said there was a walk-in, someone seeking legal funding for a court case. No appointment, but the name, Jonathan Walker. I asked to send him to the private lounge. He arrived with thinning gray hair, a wrinkled suit, clutching a folder like it was his last hope. He didn't recognize me. He simply told my assistant, "I need to speak with the company president. Please, I just want to save my son from going to prison." His son, the child he had with Madison, the woman who once took him from me, had just been charged with assaulting a police officer in a drunken fight. I entered the room. My heels echoed sharply across the stone floor. He looked up and froze. His eyes traveled from my face to the name tag on my chest, to the hands holding the legal request he'd left on the table. I tilted my head slightly. "You don't recognize me?" His face went pale. His lips trembled. "Emily." I nodded, calm, with words like needles sewn into old wounds. "I suppose I should thank you. If you hadn't kicked me out of that house, maybe I'd still be folding your shirts and staying silent at those cold dinner tables." He said nothing. I picked up the pen, signed the legal assistant's approval, and closed the folder. But before leaving, I leaned in. No theatrics, no rage. Just a quiet truth that drained every sound from the room. I'm helping this time, not because you deserve it, but because I know what it feels like to be a parent, desperate not to lose a child. But don't get it twisted. I am no longer the woman who once begged you to stay. Then I turned and walked away, leaving him with a shame he couldn't defend and a truth he could never undo.